Story 1, The Man with the Axe. There are moments from childhood that never truly leave you. Moments that burrow so deep into your memory, into the soft, unguarded places of a young mind, that no amount of time, not 10 years, not 30, not a lifetime, can ever fully scrub them clean. You can grow up, move away, build a whole new life for yourself, and still, on certain quiet evenings, when the rain taps against the window and the light fades just the right way, you are 8 years old again. You are small again. And you are terrified again. What I am about to tell you is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. Not a nightmare, not a movie, not something I heard secondhand or read in a book. This was real. This happened to me, to my brothers, to our small and ordinary lives on a gray November afternoon in the Norwegian countryside in the year 1991. And I want you to understand, before I say another word, that when you are 8 years old and someone traps you underground in the dark, and you can hear a man with an axe moving around just above your head, you do not think about being brave. You do not think about heroes or escape plans. You think only one single, consuming thought: I do not want to die today. So let me take you back. Let me take you back to a time before mobile phones, before the internet, before any of the safety nets the modern world has woven around its children. Back to a small Norwegian village, nestled in the rural countryside, where the hills rolled green in summer and turned gray and wet in autumn, where the smell of damp leaves and wood smoke was as familiar as your own mother's voice. My family lived there, my parents, my 2 older brothers, and me. My oldest brother was 12 that year. My middle brother was 10. And I was 8, small for my age, stubborn, and completely fearless in the way that only children can be, the way that comes not from real courage, but from not yet fully understanding what there is to be afraid of. We were outdoorsy children, all 3 of us. The kind of kids who were up with the birds and did not come home until their stomachs demanded it. The Norwegian countryside was our kingdom, the forests, the lake, the long wandering paths through the trees. Because there were not many other children nearby, we stuck together despite the age gaps. We were each other's best companions, and the woods behind our village were our playground. Now, just down the road from our home, there was a property that had been abandoned for as long as any of us could remember. To us children, of course, it was the haunted house. We whispered about it. We dared each other to look at it. In reality, it had once belonged to the man who founded the local brick factory, a person of some local importance, apparently, but he was long gone, and so was anyone else who might have cared for the place. The paint on the walls had been peeling for years, hanging off in long curling strips like the skin of something long dead. Several of the windows were cracked or broken altogether, and the garden, if you could still call it that, had grown wild and overgrown, a tangle of weeds and old fruit trees bent sideways by decades of coastal wind. Our parents had warned us, firmly and more than once, to stay away from that property. We, of course, assumed this was because it was haunted. They, of course, feared we would fall through a rotted floorboard or cut ourselves on broken glass. The truth of their concern and the fantasy of ours met somewhere in the middle, and the result was that we stayed away, right up until the autumn of 1991, when our oldest brother dared us to creep through the hedge and have a proper look around. And so we did. If you are new here and you love true stories that will make your heart race, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell. We have so many more stories waiting for you, and trust me, you do not want to miss a single one. What we found on the other side of that hedge was not frightening at all. It was, in fact, wonderful. There was a dried-up pond, its cracked, muddy basin full of leaves and old debris. There was an ancient well with a mossy stone rim. There were fruit trees, gnarled and half-dead, but still climbable. There were tools scattered around, left behind as though whoever had lived there had simply stepped out one afternoon and never returned. And there was an old shed, its wooden walls soft and silvery gray with age. We fell in love with it immediately. That abandoned garden became our secret world. We climbed the trees until we could see over the hedge into the street below. We picked up the old tools and used them to build things, little forts, little shelves, little projects that meant nothing to the adult world but everything to us. We had our own kingdom, and nobody was watching. It was glorious. We suspected that the neighbors had noticed us. Our parents began asking, with a certain careful casualness, whether we had been spending time near the old property. We denied it, of course, as children do. But the questions kept coming, which meant someone had complained, understandable, perhaps, given how loud and wild and untamed we were in those days. And then came November. It was just a few days before my 8th birthday. I remember that clearly, because birthdays matter enormously when you are 8, and the approach of mine had filled me with a kind of happy anticipation that made even the gray November days feel golden. It was damp that afternoon. The air had that particular November wetness to it, not quite rain, but heavier than mist, the kind that settles on your hair and soaks through your jacket without you noticing until you are already thoroughly chilled. We were not particularly in the mood to be outside, but our mother had made her feelings on the matter perfectly clear. She needed to clean the house in peace. We had 1 hour. Out we went. We ended up at the old abandoned property, as we so often did. And that afternoon, I honestly cannot remember which of my brothers suggested it. Someone proposed that we try to open the old cellar. Now I should explain what kind of cellar I mean because the English word does not quite capture it. Imagine a hatch in the ground, set almost flat, that opens upward like a door in the earth. You lift it, and beneath it are a few stone steps that lead you down into a dugout space, stone walls, an earthen floor, cold and dark and smelling of soil and old vegetables. These cellars were common in Norway at one time. They were used to store root vegetables through the winter, kept cold by the ground itself. This one had been empty for years. We climbed down together, all three of us, our eyes adjusting to the darkness, the smell of damp earth filling our noses. The plan was simple and childish and perfect. We were going to write our names on the stone walls, mark it as ours, claim it the way children claim things, with the pure, uncomplicated confidence of ownership that requires no deed and no permission. And then the hatch slammed shut above us. The darkness that fell was total, not the dimness of a shaded room or the half-dark of a cloudy evening. This was absolute blackness, the kind that presses against your open eyes and makes you feel as though you have gone blind. I started screaming immediately. I could not help it. My brothers began pushing upward against the hatch, heaving at it with their palms. My oldest brother managed to force it open just a crack. And through that crack he saw a man's hand, and in that man's hand a small axe. "Come on out, you trespassing little brats." The voice was low and rough, scraped out of a chest that sounded like gravel and old anger. My brother slammed the hatch shut from the inside hard and pressed his weight against it. "All right, little brats, I know you're all in there, all three of you. Does your mom know where you are, does she? I'll bet she doesn't. Nobody will look for you here." We heard a scraping sound, a heavy clunk, and then with a cold and horrible clarity we understood what he was doing. He had set down the axe, he had picked up a hammer, and he had begun to nail the hatch shut from the outside. I threw myself at the hatch, desperate, wild with panic. I pushed with everything I had, and for one tiny moment it shifted, a sliver of gray light appeared. But the instant it opened even a fraction, his hand reached for the axe again. "Come on now, come on out, it's really the better choice, isn't it? It must be awfully dark in there, awfully damp. Aren't you afraid of the dark? Come on, let your little brother out." And then he laughed, and we could hear in the loose and ragged edges of that laugh that he was drunk. My middle brother, Emil, was pleading with the man. His voice was earnest and frightened and very young, and he promised everything, that we would never return, that we were sorry, that we would go straight home and never speak of it again. The man did not respond to a single word. The rain had begun to fall in earnest, now heavy drops hammering on the wooden hatch above our heads. We heard thunder rolling in from the coast. "I might come back to let you out one day," the man whispered, right through the wood, so close we could have touched his lips if the door had not been between us. "Or maybe I'll butcher all three of you." Then the hammering resumed, nail by nail, sealing us in. If this story is giving you chills, please give it a like and share it with a friend. Stories like these remind us how fragile safety can be and how brave ordinary children can be when it truly matters. For a long time after the hammering stopped, we did not move. We did not make a sound. The darkness was absolute, the cold pressing in from the stone walls on all sides, the earthen floor beneath us damp and soft. My oldest brother told us very quietly to stay calm. He was 12 years old. He was trying to sound like a grown-up, and somehow it helped. We decided to count to 100, loudly together so that the sound of our own voices would fill the terrible silence. 1, 2, 3, our voices were shaky at first, then more steady. By 50, I had almost stopped crying. By 100, we were ready. We felt our way to the hatch and pushed. It held, nailed fast. My oldest brother told us to feel along the stone walls, look for a loose stone. We ran our palms across the rough, cold surfaces, pressing and testing each one. The edges were sharp, and we cut our hands. I remember the sting of it, the slick feeling of blood on my fingers that I could not see in the dark. But eventually, after what felt like a very long time, we found one. A single stone that shifted slightly when we pressed it. And when we worked at it carefully, persistently, it came free. The cellar was old. The walls had been built long ago, and the wet Norwegian coastal climate had been working on them quietly for decades. The wood of the hatch was soft with age and moisture. The mortar between the stones had crumbled. What had once been solid was, in fact, fragile. Getting a good push against the lower section of the hatch was nearly impossible from where we stood. The geometry was wrong, the angle too steep, the leverage too poor. But we were running on something more powerful than technique. We were running on pure animal panic and on the adrenaline of 3 children who desperately wanted to see their mother again. We broke through the lower half. The wood gave way in pieces, soft and rotted, and we dug at the earth beneath it with our bare hands, scooping and clawing until there was a gap. A small, low gap, barely enough to squeeze through. I was the smallest. My brothers looked at me in the dark, and without any of us needing to say a word out loud, I understood. They pressed their hands against my back and helped push me through. I came out into the cold November air and straightened up in the rain. I looked around, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man was gone. I went back to my brothers, pressed my face to the gap and told them. And then came the second. Problem, the gap was too small for either of them to fit through. My oldest brother told me, very calmly, what I needed to do. I would have to find the hammer. I would have to use it to break the rest of the hatch open from the outside. I want you to understand what that meant for me, standing alone in that wet November garden at 8 years old. It meant that at any moment the man could come back, with his axe, and I would have no one. My brothers were underground. I would be alone and exposed, with nothing but a hammer between me and a drunk man who had threatened to kill us. I stood there in the rain for what felt like a long, long time. Then I found the hammer, and I got to work. I could not get the nails out. I was not strong enough for that. So instead, I used the hammer simply to smash the hatch apart. Piece by piece, the old soft wood gave way under the blows until the opening was wide enough. My brothers scrambled out, gasping in the cold air. And then all 3 of us ran. Ran across that wild garden, through the hedge up the road, and through our own front door, arriving breathless and soaked and bleeding from the cuts on our palms, our clothes in absolute ruins. Our mother took one look at us and threw a fit. "What on earth have you been doing? Just look at the state of you. What happened to your hands?" "Nothing," we said, together without hesitation. Nothing happened. We did not know what else to say. We did not know how to begin. And so we said nothing, and we never went back to that abandoned property again, not even to look at it. We never found out who the man was. We never told our parents. We never told anyone. But every single year, when my brothers and I come home for Christmas, when we are sitting around the table, older now, with our own lives and our own children and the comfortable weight of decades between us and that November afternoon, we like to ask, with a smile that only the 3 of us understand, whether there is any news about the old ghost house down the road. Has anyone moved in there yet? Story 2, The Man in the Ski Mask. This story takes place in the late 1980s when I was in my early teens. I want you to picture where I grew up. Not a neighborhood, not a suburb, not anywhere with streetlights or sidewalks or the comfort of knowing your neighbors by name. I grew up in a secluded, forested area, the kind of place where the trees pressed close on all sides. And the silence at night was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. Our driveway was long, not just long, but genuinely long, the kind that took a full minute to drive down and was edged on both sides by tall, dark trees that blocked out most of the sky. Our small house sat in the middle of a square acre of mowed grass, with forest on 2 sides, and at night the darkness beyond the yard lights was absolute and impenetrable. I had a friend who lived in town about 20 miles away. To get there, I would ride my bicycle down completely empty country roads, no traffic, no other houses, nothing for miles in any direction. It was always an adventure, and I loved it. He had invited me to come over and spend the night, and I said yes without a second thought. I would call my mother at work, let her know, and then start pedaling. I hung up the phone and started getting dressed, all in black, as it happened, which will matter later. And then I picked up the receiver again to call my mother. The line was dead. I want to be very clear, this had never happened before. We had a sturdy rotary phone, the kind built to last, and it had never given us a single problem in all the years we'd had it. There was nothing wrong with it, and now it was completely, absolutely silent. My mind went immediately, and I could not explain why, not rationally, to the small phone junction box on the back of the house. A small round box, rubber-covered, where the outside line connected to our interior wiring. Completely exposed. Completely vulnerable to anyone who knew it was there and knew what they were doing. Why would I think of that? Why would my brain jump so immediately to that specific, unsettling conclusion? I was wrestling with myself, trying to be reasonable. You're being dramatic. It's probably just a downed line somewhere. Relax. But I could not shake it. Something had settled over me like a cold, heavy blanket, not just anxiety, not just imagination, but something more animal than that. A genuine, bone-deep sense of wrongness, of danger, of being watched. I made a decision. I would act as though the danger was real while allowing myself to believe it probably was not. I finished getting dressed. I strapped on my buck knife, an old Rambo-style blade with a compass in the handle, cheap but impressively large. And I made a plan. I would slide out the front door and pull it shut and locked behind me, no going back. Inside, I would grab my bike from the porch, use my elbow to press the door handle button on the screen door, and go down the concrete steps. Then I would get on my bike and ride as fast as I possibly could down the driveway to the road. I executed the plan almost perfectly. Almost. My elbow slipped off the screen door handle and banged into the door as it swung open, making noise, more noise than I wanted. But within seconds I was on my bike and moving, pedaling hard down the gravel driveway, the stones crunching under my tires. I turned my head to look back over my shoulder toward the rear of the house, just for a moment, just one glance. And something made me keep looking. Some instinct, some feeling would not let me turn away. At the last possible instant, just before the angle shifted and the view disappeared, I saw him. A man, dark clothing, a ski mask pulled down over his face. He came tearing around the back corner of the house at a dead run, plunging immediately into the deep shadow along the side wall, moving fast toward the front, toward the porch, toward the exact spot where I had been standing just seconds before. I was wearing black from head to toe. He could not see me. He went for the porch, drawn by the sound I had made when my elbow hit the door. And I leaned forward over my handlebars and pedaled harder than I had ever pedaled in my life. The driveway was dark, but I knew every inch of it. I could just barely make out the stone gate posts at the end before the dirt road. I nearly wrecked taking the corner, almost went down entirely, but I recovered, straightened out, and kept going. A mile down the road, I finally stopped. I stood at the intersection of a paved road, alone in the dark, my chest heaving, my forehead soaked with sweat, my heart beating so hard it almost hurt. I stood there until my breathing steadied. I stood there and I thought about what I had just seen and whether I had truly seen it. I knew it with complete certainty. I had seen a man in a ski mask running out of my yard. My nearest neighbors were Amish, no phone. There was nothing to do but keep going, and so I did. When I finally arrived at my friend's house much later, I told him everything and we called my mother. She listened carefully. She did not dismiss what I said, she took me seriously. But she would not be home until morning, and she told me only that she would be careful. And that was the end. Of it, no arrest, no answers. No explanation ever for who that man was or what he had come for that night. I had noticed strange things before. Now and then, laughter once from the edge of the woods, objects in the yard moved from where I had left them. I had put it down to the Amish kids from the neighboring farm, fooling around. But Amish children do not know how to disconnect a phone line. Story 3, The Man in the Box. If a story like this has ever made you wonder how you would react, what you would do, write your answer in the comments below. You might be surprised by what you find out about yourself. I grew up in a small farmhouse on 2 acres of land. We were not a working farm, but my mother was a veterinarian, and she had a deep and unwavering commitment to animals in need. Over the years, a parade of sick, neglected, and recovering creatures had passed through our property. It was a peaceful, living kind of place, the air always full of birdsong, the yard always dotted with some small creature going about its business. There was a walking trail through the wooded area at the back of our property, and during the warmer months, tourists, hikers, and campers would frequently pass by. I was a bookworm, the kind of child who was perfectly happy spending hours alone in the quiet of our barn at the back of the property, reading or tending to the animals. I knew the rhythms of that place like I knew the back of my own hand. On the particular afternoon I want to tell you about, I was 10 years old. I came home from school about an hour before my mother finished work. She trusted me to manage the bus ride, let myself into the front gate, and get started on my afternoon chores. I was a sensible kid. I knew the routine. I came up the dirt driveway, let myself in, made myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a glass of milk, the classic, the reliable, the perfect after-school snack, and headed out the back door toward the barn. Something was wrong immediately. I just did not know it yet. Our dogs should have come running to meet me. They always did a happy, chaotic greeting of wagging tails and circling legs and excited barking. But on this afternoon, the yard was quiet. I called for them. Nothing. And then, muffled and distant, I heard barking coming from inside the barn. That was odd. The dogs were never locked in the barn during the day. Never. I set my snack down on a nearby tree, stump, and went to open the barn door. They rushed out, all three of them perfectly fine, happy to see me, bounding around my feet. I glanced quickly around the interior of the barn. Nothing seemed out of place. Quiet as usual. Perhaps my mother had locked them in that morning for some reason. Perhaps the wind had blown the door shut. I was not too concerned. I collected my sandwich, settled on a hay bale inside the barn, and let the dog nearest me share a few bites, as I always did. That is when I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, a tall and very thin man walked slowly past the open barn entrance. He was making strange sounds as he walked, a kind of rapid babbling, like someone trying to speak in several languages at once, none of them coherent. His hair was long and matted into a gray tangle. His beard was the same. He was so thin that you could see the outline of his ribs and the knobs of his spine even through his clothing. Strangely, my dogs barely reacted. They glanced toward the door, wagged their tails twice, and turned their attention back to my sandwich. This was not right. These were dogs who barked at strangers, dogs who announced every unfamiliar presence with enthusiasm. But this man, this strange, muttering, skeletal man, they treated like someone familiar. A small thread of unease began to pull at the edges of my stomach. But I was a child, and my dog seemed calm, and so I told myself it was fine. I crept to the barn doorway and peeked out. He was at our chicken coop. He had bent forward and was searching inside it with one hand. After a moment, he straightened up, holding an egg. He held it up close to his face and studied it with intense, unblinking concentration, turning it slowly in his fingers as though it were something extraordinary. Then he said something to it, quietly, privately, something I could not hear, and placed the entire egg in his mouth. He bit down. The shell cracked. The yolk ran down his chin and his throat in thick yellow streams, dripping from his jawline, staining the collar of his shirt. He was chewing on the shell itself, his jaw moving slowly, deliberately, grinding it to pieces, his eyes fixed on nothing, or perhaps on everything, in that intense and unfocused way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to be sick. I was doing neither. I was completely frozen, unable to look away, my brain struggling to make sense of what my eyes were sending it. Then he turned his head and looked directly at me. He did not react to the sight of me. There was no surprise in his face, no guilt, no acknowledgement that anything unusual was happening. He simply looked at me, continuing to chew, yolk still running down his chin, and kept on eating. I screamed. I screamed so loudly that the sound tore out of me before I had any awareness of making it. And then I bolted across the wet lawn, up the back wooden steps, into the house. I slammed the door and locked it with shaking hands and pressed my back against it, my heart crashing against my ribs. Then I remembered my dogs. I had left them outside with him. I peeled back a corner of the curtain on the back door window and looked out. He was standing in the middle of the yard, completely still, staring at the back door, and my dogs were at his feet, calmly licking raw egg from his fingers. I started shaking, deep, uncontrollable shaking, the kind that starts in your core and works its way outward until your hands are trembling and your teeth are chattering. He was not a threat to the dogs. He had befriended them. They trusted him, and that meant he had been here before. That meant he knew this property. That meant I was alone with him and I needed help immediately. I went for the phone, and as I crossed the kitchen, I heard him begin to babble again, loudly, urgently, and the sound was getting closer. With fingers that would barely cooperate, I dialed my mother's work number. The babbling was getting louder. He was coming up the back steps. My mother answered. I could barely form words. I forced them out somehow. I need help. There is a man. He is on the property. And she told me very calmly and very quickly to go to my bedroom, lock the door, and hide under the bed. Then she hung up and called the police. He was at the back door now, babbling continuously, fists hitting the wood over and over in a heavy, rhythmic banging. I ran upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and crawled under the bed. I made absolutely certain not even my toes were visible, and I lay there in the dark underneath my own bed, listening. He went around the outside of the house. I heard him testing windows, hitting them, calling out in those babbling streams of sound. He wanted in. He was trying every possible way to get in, and I lay there waiting for the sound of breaking glass. Give this video a like if you can feel your heart pounding right now. Share it with someone who loves true stories, because this one has an ending that will truly surprise you. When the police arrived, I crept downstairs and looked out the window. I could see my mother running up the driveway, face white with fear. She burst through the door and wrapped her arms around me and would not let go, kissing my hair over and over while the police questioned both of us, which was embarrassing in the way that only a parent's love can be embarrassing. They took the man away to the station. A week later, the same two officers returned. They sat down in our kitchen and explained. The man had been secretly living in our barn, not for days, for months. He slept there at night and hid in the woods along the trail during the day. The hikers and tourists who used the trail had seen him frequently over the summer and thought nothing of it. He was homeless. He had serious mental health conditions, a long history of hospitalizations, and he had stopped taking his medication. He had been in crisis, alone, with nowhere to go. When the weather turned cold, the barn had been his only shelter. He had befriended the dogs over weeks, coming and going quietly while we were asleep or away. His mother had died a few years earlier. There was no one to look after him. He was a sick man who was simply trying to survive. Now I want to tell you the rest of the story, because this is not a horror story. Not really. 27 years later, we buried him. The man we came to call Jim got the help he needed, with my mother's fierce and steady support. He went back on his medication and began to draw a disability pension. My mother helped him find a small rented place in town and made the security deposit herself. Jim became a regular volunteer on our property, helping tend the animals. Eventually, he got paid a few hours a week at the veterinary clinic, helping to clean and maintain the space. It was not always easy. Jim had episodes. There were hard days. But for the last half of his life, Jim had a home, a job, friends, a community that knew him, and people who made sure he was never truly alone again. He loved the animals with a gentleness that nobody who had seen him in that yard would ever have predicted. We buried our friend last week. For someone who had nothing, and who had once terrified a small child hiding under her own bed, Jim left a lasting mark on everyone who knew him. Sometimes the creepiest story has the warmest ending. Story 4, I'm in your house. I was about 16 years old when this happened. It was an ordinary evening, me alone in my room watching TV, the house quiet around me. The phone rang, unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing, then a click as the line went dead. I figured wrong number, went back to the TV. The phone rang again. Hello? More heavy breathing. Who is this? Silence. Look, just stop calling me. I hung up. They called again immediately. I let it ring 4, 5, 6 times. Then I picked up, trying to sound more annoyed than scared. Hey, I'm sure you think this is funny, but please stop. The person on the other end was laughing, softly, steadily, in a way that made my skin prickle. I'm in your house, he said, and hung up. Every single hair on my body stood straight up. I did not move for a moment. Then I moved very slowly to my bedroom door. My room was a renovated garage. It opened directly into the kitchen, with the living room just to my right. I eased the door open and looked out. The living room door was wide open, a door that had been closed when I went to my room. For approximately 10 seconds, I stood completely frozen. Then instinct took over completely. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, grabbed the largest knife from the knife block, and started moving through the house, turning on every single light as I went, flooding each room with brightness before I entered it. I made it to my father's room and shook him awake. The expression on his face when he opened his eyes and saw me looming over him holding a butcher knife was, in hindsight, genuinely funny. But I was not laughing then. Someone is in the house, I whispered. He was out of bed in an instant, reaching into his underwear drawer for a loaded revolver. I stayed directly behind him as we moved through every room, checking closets, checking under the bed in my room, working through the whole house systematically while I explained everything that had happened. Then my father took a flashlight and went to look down the driveway. He shone the beam down the long, dark stretch of gravel. and suddenly took off running at full speed, shouting words I will not repeat here. When he came back, out of breath and empty-handed, he told me what he had seen. A man in a hoodie, crouching in the bushes at the edge of the driveway, who had bolted the moment the flashlight caught him. He got away. We never found out who he was. We told the police, but there was nothing concrete to go on. The open living room door, had he been inside? Had he been bluffing? We still do not know, but I slept with a knife close by for a very long time after that. Story 5, Oz. If you have ever had a neighbor or stranger make you feel genuinely unsafe, tell us about it in the comments. You are not alone, and your story matters. I moved to Los Angeles 3 years ago, first time living truly on my own in a city in an apartment building, and I loved it. I still love it, even after everything I am about to tell you. I am a light smoker, 3, maybe 4 cigarettes a day. My building does not allow smoking inside, so I step out front whenever I want one. This is how I first encountered the man I am going to call Oz. The first time I saw him, he was outside the building, sitting near the dumpster. I assumed he was a neighbor I had not yet met. He glanced over at me once or twice during my cigarette and said nothing. No big deal. A couple of days later, late at night, I noticed something in the lobby as I came downstairs. There was a lump under a blanket, tucked behind some chairs near the wall. A cord snaked out from under the blanket, and I assumed someone was sleeping off a domestic argument and charging their phone. I had my smoke and went back to bed. A week passed. The next time I saw Oz outside, it was the middle of the day. He had papers with him, a remarkable amount of papers, actually stacked and sorted as though he was working through something important. He was a tall man, early to mid-30s, with medium-length hair styled into dreadlocks, a short, full beard, and a face that seemed clean and cared for despite clothing that had clearly seen better days. My gut told me he was homeless, though he carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity. He looked over at me and said hello. I said hello back, because why wouldn't I? We exchanged a few polite, easy words about the weather. Then he asked, quite casually, "So when are you moving?" I blinked. The question seemed to come from nowhere. Was he hoping for an apartment in the building? Was he expecting someone to leave? My mind moved through a rapid series of questions and came out the other side puzzled and slightly unsettled. "I'm not moving anytime soon," I said. That was that, but I thought about it afterward. Something about the question had felt strange, not threatening, not aggressive, just oddly weighted. A week later, I came home at 10 in the evening to find 2 police vehicles outside the building, lights flashing. I went inside and let the officers handle whatever was happening, assuming it was none of my business. 2 days after that, a notice appeared near the mailboxes. A photograph. A name, Oz. The notice said he was not permitted in the building. The lump under the blanket, it turned out, had been Oz. He had gotten inside the building somehow and had been sleeping in the lobby with an electric blanket. A few months went by. I stopped thinking about him. Then he reappeared. Same spot outside the building, even more paperwork. But this time, the moment he saw me, his manner had changed completely. There was an edge in him now, a bristling hostility that had not been there before. "So when are you getting out of here?" I did not understand the question. What? "I want my apartment back, man. You stole my apartment." I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him so. I snuffed out my cigarette and went back inside, but it did not end there. For the next 2 weeks, every few days, there was Oz, and every time the accusation was the same and grew more insistent. He believed with complete conviction that I had stolen his apartment from him, that I had taken his credit cards, that I owed him something. Each conversation left me more shaken than the last. I work late. On weeknights, I often do not get home until midnight or later. There is no predicting when Oz would be there, and so I began to dread coming home. I began finding reasons to stay away longer, to delay the moment I would have to walk past him. The evening he told me he would get me if I had not vacated his apartment by end of day, that shook me in a way the previous conversations had not. I went inside and did not go back out. At midnight, I needed a cigarette badly enough to try my luck. Oz was at the dumpster. I walked in the opposite direction and smoked quickly, watching him over my shoulder. When I turned back, he had moved to stand directly in front of the building entrance, blocking it. I approached the steps and asked to pass. He blocked me. He told me I did not live there. I told him I did. We went back and forth several times, and the conversation became increasingly tense. He demanded I produce my lease. I told him I did not carry it with me everywhere. He told me to leave. Or his security team would remove me. I told him I was calling the police. I called the non-emergency number, something I have since reconsidered, as the situation probably warranted the regular line. The officers arrived about 30 minutes later, by which point Oz was still there. I spoke to one officer. Oz spoke to the other separately. The story he told was extraordinary. He claimed I had stolen his apartment, his credit cards, and various insurance payouts. He also, with complete earnestness, accused me of throwing a bottle of dog urine on him, explaining that I had somehow launched it upward at him while he stood on the stoop above me, and then contradicting himself entirely, claiming I had poured it down on him from the fire escape. The officers recognized immediately that this was not a coherent account of events. They could not arrest Oz, no crime had actually been committed against me, but they could, and did, tell him to leave. I hoped that would be the end of it. It was not quite. Oz returned one final time. I came downstairs on an ordinary afternoon and found two police officers, Oz and my downstairs neighbor John, all standing outside. John's elbows were scraped raw and bleeding. One of his knees was cut. Oz had some bruising. John told me that Oz had tried to force his way into the building when John was coming in, that they had struggled, that it had gotten physical before the police were called. The security camera, unfortunately, had not caught the angle of the fight. It was his word against John's, and the police could only, again, tell Oz to leave. Since that day, I have not seen him. A sign has gone up outside the building declaring it private property with no public access. It is both comforting and a quiet reminder of how fragile ordinary safety can be, and how quickly someone in the grip of a serious mental break can make a peaceful life feel precarious. Story 6, The Farmhouse and the Watcher. This story takes place in early 2017. I had recently left the West Coast and moved to a small Midwestern town, a deliberate choice to slow things down, get some distance from bad habits, reset. Before all that, I had spent one season working for a couple in California, trimming their cannabis crop. Unglamorous work, but it paid. The man of the pair was difficult and guarded, the kind of person who gave off a low, steady hum of unpleasantness. His girlfriend was more tolerable. I did the work they paid me, and I considered it done. Except the man kept texting. Casual messages, hey, how are you, the kind of contact that implies a closeness that never actually existed. I responded politely and briefly and hoped it would fade. Then his girlfriend messaged me in the spring. They were going abroad on vacation. Would I be available to house sit? The farm was in California, I was in Colorado, but they were offering good money, plus additional pay for trimming leftover stock. I had not found steady work yet. The dollar signs were louder than the instinct that was trying, quietly, to tell me something was not right. I drove 17 hours. Let me describe the setup. It was a full house, but I was staying in the attached gardener's quarters, a self-contained space with a bedroom, bathroom, and small kitchen area. The gardener's quarters had a door that connected to the main house interior, but before they left, the couple spent 2 or 3 days on site. During that time, the man drilled the interior door shut from his side, so I could not access the main house. I understood the reasoning, their home, their privacy, and I accepted it without question. They left for Morocco. I settled in, walking the dogs, filling the hummingbird feeders, trimming the remaining stock, watching the house as hired. This property was deep in the middle of nowhere. No one was likely to come by. Everything seemed fine. Until I heard water running. It was coming from inside the main house, from the kitchen on the other side of the sealed door. I was the only person on the property. I was certain of it. I texted the couple immediately. The reply came back quickly. It is none of your concern what you hear on the other side of that wall. That sentence turned my entire stomach over. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, behind a locked gate on private property, and I had just been told not to concern myself with the sounds of someone moving around in the sealed section of the house I was paid to watch. 2 more weeks stretched ahead of me. My phone barely had service, and something or someone was on the other side of that wall. Over the following days, I moved between waves of fear and fragile calm. One afternoon, I was sitting outside with the dogs when all of them suddenly sprang up and ran around the side of the house together, tails wagging, greeting something. I heard a very soft SHH, and then the sound of quick footsteps withdrawing. I continued to hear the television, the microwave, running water, all from the sealed section of the house. The messages from the girlfriend felt uncomfortably intimate, commenting on small details of my daily routine that she could only have known about through surveillance. I searched my room for cameras. I found nothing obvious, but the combination of the sounds, the dog's behavior, and those unsettling text messages was enough. Someone was in that house. Someone was watching me. I decided at some point that if I was being observed, and possibly in danger, I might as well make myself as unpredictable and frankly bizarre as possible. I reasoned, with whatever logic a frightened and isolated person has access to at midnight, that if someone was planning to do something to me, acting completely unhinged might discourage them. I blasted pop music at full volume. I set up the outdoor trash cans as a drum kit and played them. I wandered around outside at odd hours talking to myself. And then one night near midnight, I was on the small porch having a late cigarette. I heard footsteps moving around the perimeter of the house. I stood up, opened the door to my quarters, and closed it again loudly, clearly, as though I were going inside for the night. Then I stood exactly where I was, cigarette still in hand, completely still. A few seconds later, a figure came around the side of the house. Having moved because they thought I had gone inside, saw me standing there, and bolted into the tree line. I had not imagined it. I had set a small, quiet trap, and it had worked. I spent the remaining days in that strange, suspended state of fear and bizarre self-preservation until the couple returned. Then came the money argument. They initially resisted paying what they owed, as though the situation had not been frightening enough already. I got my payment eventually, after considerable pushing. I want to say this to anyone reading or listening. Do not house-sit for people you do not know well, and be especially cautious about the Emerald Triangle. It is not a place where the usual rules apply. Story 7, Someone Had a Key. This is the kind of story that makes you look at ordinary, everyday places differently. If you have ever had your sense of safety shaken in your own home, I want you to know your feelings are valid. Write something in the comments if this resonates with you. My roommate and I are both women in our late 20s, best friends. We had just celebrated our 1-month anniversary of living together in our new apartment in the Greater Toronto area. Good neighborhood, old building, well maintained. The tenants are long-timers. Many of them had lived there for 20 years or more. Before we moved in, we were assured the locks had been changed fresh. There were 4 keys to our apartment. Mine, my roommates, the building's elderly caretaker couple, and the maintenance handyman. On the day in question, I was the last to leave at about 8 in the morning. I locked the door. My roommate returned around 4:30, unlocked it, changed her clothes, and went back out. We both arrived home together around 6. I went straight to my room to change out of my work clothes, and I noticed my closet. I am a very tidy person. I keep my things organized. The small box of miscellaneous items I kept on the closet shelf, a notebook, lip balm, a keychain, small everyday things, had fallen to the floor. Except the box itself had been put back up on the shelf. And some of my dirty clothes from my laundry basket were now inside it, as though someone had been moving them aside and had knocked the box down in the process. New clothes I had recently bought, still hanging up, were now hanging inside the box, as though someone had been moving quickly along the clothing rail and accidentally dragged them in. I stood there and tried to rationalize it. Had my roommate gone in my closet for something? No, she would have asked. Had I done this myself somehow? I went through every possibility I could think of. Nothing added up. Then about 4 hours later, my roommate called my name from her room in a tone of voice I had never heard from her before. Sharp, startled, confused. I went in. She was holding something up. "I found the gift you left me," she said. "What gift?" "In my pillow." I stared at what she was holding. It was mine, a personal item from my laundry basket, the kind of thing a person keeps private. She had found it tucked inside her pillowcase. The wheels started turning. The disturbed closet. The things moved in my laundry basket. Someone had let themselves into our apartment with a key, gone through my things, found something private, and placed it deliberately inside her pillow so she would discover it when she went to bed. This was not random. This was intentional. This was someone who wanted us to know they had been there. After several stunned minutes, the full weight of it settled on us both. Someone had access to our apartment for the entire month we had been living there. They had come in and gone out without us ever knowing. We went to the building caretakers. The husband largely tried to minimize it, suggested it might be a prank, asked whether we had given our key to anyone. We had not. I believe it was a combination of generational perspective and discomfort that made him want to smooth it over. But we did not let it go. We called the police. They came within an hour, listened carefully, looked around, and took down everything we told them. They could not do much with what they had, but we had a paper trail now, and I made sure the maintenance man's name was included in the report. The next morning, the old caretaker and the handyman changed our locks. We ordered a small, discreet camera, and we watched. I hope whoever it was never came back. I believe they did not. But the feeling of having your home violated, of knowing that for a whole month, while you slept and got dressed and lived your private life, someone could have been watching, that feeling is not something that leaves quickly. Your home is supposed to be the one place in the world where you are safe. When that is taken from you, even temporarily, something shifts in how you look at every locked door. Story 8, The Quiet Kid at the Desk Beside Me. I want to be careful telling this one, because it involves things that are genuinely disturbing. I will keep the most graphic details as minimal as possible, but I also think this story needs to be told, because it is a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling danger has no dramatic music, no warning signs visible to ordinary eyes. It just sits quietly beside you and flicks through its tablet. This was 2012 in Canberra, Australia. I had just started year 11 at a new secondary school. I was placed in a small advanced English class of 6 or 7 students, taught by the deputy principal himself, as part of an experiment in entirely digital learning. We used iPads for everything. I was not a fan of the format, but the class was small and relatively quiet. I sat next to the quietest kid in the room. I will call him Jimbo. He barely spoke during our lessons, not to the teacher, not to the other students. He would lean back in his chair and flick idly through his iPad, the screen facing him. He seemed absent in a particular way, as though the classroom was simply a waiting room and whatever his real life was happening somewhere else. A few weeks in, he stopped showing up. One day absent, then another, then a week, then 2. I asked the deputy principal where he was. The deputy had no patience for me, rolled his eyes, pushed past without a word. I let it go. Then I made some new friends, and one of them, a genuine and good-hearted boy I will call Jerry, pulled me aside one day with an expression I had never seen on his usually cheerful face. Jerry and Jimbo had been friends at their previous school. One afternoon over the summer break, while Jerry was visiting, Jimbo had spilled a glass of milk on the kitchen floor. Jerry laughed. Jimbo told him to clean it up. Jerry turned around and found a knife at his throat. Jimbo forced him to clean up the milk at knife point. What Jerry told me next, about what was on that iPad, the one that had sat less than a foot from me, day after day in our small classroom, I cannot and will not describe in full detail. I will tell you only that it involved animals, that it was extensive and systematic, and that Jimbo had apparently been doing this in a large open field very close to the school for some time. A field I knew well. A field I had spent time in myself, thankfully at a safe distance from wherever his activities had taken place. There was a list found on the iPad, a goals list, at the top of it progressing from what he had been doing to something far worse. From what I later learned, Jimbo was charged with animal cruelty, and no one in our area has heard from him since. I think about that classroom sometimes, 6 or 7 students, a teacher, small, quiet, ordinary, and the most dangerous thing in it every single day was just leaning back in his chair and flicking through his screen. Story 9, The Green Van and the 5 Men. I was a teenager when this happened. I want to be upfront and say I was not making the best decisions that evening. I had been drinking and smoking with friends, and when the time came to go home, there was nobody sober enough to drive me. I borrowed a hoodie and some leggings from my friend, pulled them over my party outfit, and decided to walk. It was more than 30 minutes to my house, and it was past midnight, and I had done this walk many times, never at this hour and never alone, but I told myself I knew the way, and it would be fine. Within the first 10 minutes, as I turned from the main intersection onto the road leading to my neighborhood, a large green van pulled up beside me and slowed to match my pace. My fingers, operating apparently on pure instinct, dialed the emergency number, 111, New Zealand's equivalent of 999 or 911. At the exact moment the operator picked up, the passenger door of the van flew open and a young man jumped out. "Get in the van," he said. "Fire, ambulance, or police," said the operator in my ear. "Police," I said, "please." The young man stopped, looked at the phone at my ear, got back in the van, and they drove away fast. I told the operator what had happened, that a man had tried to get me into a vehicle, that I was alone walking home, and yes, I told her honestly that I had been smoking weed because it felt important to be truthful. I kept the call short to preserve my battery and kept walking. Every time I saw headlights behind me, I ducked into a driveway or behind a hedge. I did this for 15 minutes, diving, hiding, watching the lights pass, then emerging and moving again. At some point, I began to notice a white sedan. It passed me. Then a few minutes later, it passed me again from the other direction. Then again. I told myself I was being paranoid. I kept moving. I reached an open paddock across from a primary school and saw headlights approaching again. Without stopping to think, I vaulted a 6-foot fence and landed running, sprinting toward a large tree in the middle of the paddock and pressing myself behind it. The white sedan pulled over directly in front of the fence. 5 grown men got out. "Where is she?" They spread out along the street, searching. One of them peered over the fence into the paddock, scanning the darkness. My hand was already on my phone, dialing again. I gave the operator my name, my address, my exact location, repeating it over and over because my voice would not stay steady enough for anything more coherent. The operator talked me down gently, got the full story, and told me the police were on their way and I should stay hidden. I heard sirens. I nearly sobbed with relief. The police car drove straight past. The 5 men scrambled back into the sedan and drove away at speed. I was crying openly now, pressing my face to the bark of the tree, telling the operator through tears that the police had missed them. And then a voice from just the other side of the fence. "Hello, excuse me, are you okay?" A man's voice, calm, concerned. I pressed further behind the tree and said nothing. "Were those men looking for you? I live across the street. I heard you crying." I looked out from behind the tree. The fence stood between us. He was standing on the pavement, hands visible, his face open and worried. "Yes," I said. "Are they gone?" When the police passed, they left. He offered to take me to his house until the police arrived. I climbed back over the fence and went with him to his garage, where he had been working on his car in the small, warm hours of the morning. He gave me a hot drink and a cigarette and sat with me until my hands stopped shaking. After 10 minutes, it became clear the police were not returning, and so he drove me home. I have thought about that night many times since. I had been young and not especially cautious, but I had also, thanks to paranoia, perhaps, and a habit of listening to true crime stories, called for help at the exact right moment. 10 seconds later, and I would not have had the phone to my ear when that door opened. Story 10, Something in the Road. A few years ago, I was back in my small farming hometown for the weekend, staying with family. Running was something I did whenever I visited, and I had remembered to bring my shoes this time, so off I went on a familiar route through the flat grid of farm roads. At about 1.5 miles out, just as I reached the point where I would normally turn back, a car slowed beside me. A man leaned out the window. "Are you okay in this rain?" I looked up. It was barely drizzling. I said yes, I was fine, thank you, and he drove on. I watched him turn down a side road and felt a quiet, prickling unease settle in my chest. He was a stranger, and the weather was not the kind anyone would genuinely worry about. Then the same car came up behind me again. It passed me slowly and pulled over to the side just ahead, parking at the edge of a field. I ran through my mental map of the route. The road ahead of me, past that car, ran straight and exposed for 1/2 mile with no houses, no farms, nothing but open fields on both sides. The road to my right had scattered houses and my uncle's place not far off. I turned right. I ran the entire way without stopping. I walked into my uncle's house and called my father, "Come get me right now." My parents were worried enough that my mother drove out almost immediately to find a neighbor they knew who regularly ran that same route, a woman who had just started her run. My mother stopped her, explained what I had seen, and gave her a lift back. I texted another neighbor, a former law enforcement officer. She called me within minutes, asking for a description of the car. I gave her what I could remember. She told me the same car had stopped earlier that afternoon and spoken to her 11-year-old daughter while the child was playing in the yard. The police looked into it. The driver had recently been released from jail, was on parole, and was not supposed to be in our area. He had also stopped a third woman who had been jogging alone, and she said the only thing that seemed to make him back off was when she produced her phone. I had my phone with me that day. I am very glad I did. Story 11, James. If you have ever dealt with unwanted attack, touched me, told me about the state of his marriage, and made it explicitly clear what he wanted. I said no. I went home and told my husband, who said exactly what I had expected him to say. I told you so. I went to my director the next day. He asked if I was being moody because of my menstrual cycle. I started working from other sites. I stopped going to after-work drinks. I could not block his number, it was a company phone. The rumors he spread made everything worse, and everyone kept telling me how happy he was, as though my discomfort was a fair price for his good mood. Eventually, his wife contacted HR. She claimed I had been booking hotel rooms on my company credit card and having affairs with her husband. She alleged I had handled stolen goods and kept alcohol at work. I faced a full investigation. I sat there while the accusations piled up and thought very carefully about how I had ended up here. The investigation cleared me. Familiar small town, only about 6,000 people, so that was not unusual. He was quiet and a little odd, just staring at me rather than engaging normally. I glanced at him a couple of times, paid, and left. I got home and opened Facebook. A friend request was waiting. I recognized the face as someone local and accepted without thinking twice. A few hours later, the pieces clicked together. It was him, the cashier. He had got my name off my ID when I paid, found me online, and sent the request within 5 minutes of my leaving the store. I told my boyfriend. We agreed it was weird, but I left it alone. A few days later, he came into the pharmacy where I worked. My boss had never seen him before. He picked up a single item, came over to me, and started making conversation, telling me we had been close friends in high school, though we had never spoken a single word to each other. I was polite because I did not know what else to. To anyone listening who has gone through something similar, the fear is real, it is reasonable, and it does eventually ease. But you carry it for a while first. You carry it for a long while. Story 13, Lost in the Forest. This story happened when I was 8 or 9 years old in the Philippines. We went to our province every year for the Christmas and New Year holidays. Our house was on a mountain, surrounded by forest, beautiful and peaceful in the way that only truly remote places can be. One night I had an argument with my mother. I was small and angry and not thinking clearly, and sometime between 11 at night and midnight, I ran out of the house in tears, not paying any attention to where my feet were taking me. I walked until the feelings started to ease, and then I stopped at a tree to catch my breath. When I finally looked around, I understood that I had no idea where I was. The forest around me was dark in a way that. The police were called. They came that night and then returned the following day. The body had been dismembered. The teeth had been removed, making identification impossible. The killer was never found. We left the next morning and never went back. My mother and I apologized to each other for the argument that had started the whole night. We never spoke of what happened in the forest again, but I have thought of it many, many times over the years. Story 14, My Uncle and the Water. My uncle was the main male figure in my life growing up. My mother raised us alone, and he was always around, a constant, reliable presence. Eccentric, yes, unconventional, but I thought of him simply as my crazy uncle, and I trusted him. Until I was 14. He had a boat, and he would take me and my siblings out on the water around the part of Australia where we lived. On this particular day, I had been talking with my crush on the dock before Common. Authorities and I carry some anger about that still. But I want anyone listening who has been in a similar position to know, the instinct that tells you something is wrong is not overreacting. It is not drama. It is your body protecting itself. Trust it. Story 15. The Dream That Wasn't Entirely a Dream. This is our final story for today, and it might be the one that stays with you the longest. Sometimes the scariest thing is discovering that the nightmare you thought you had was not entirely yours to have. 7 years ago, I was 16. I grew up in rural Australia, in a house that sat well and truly at the end of a very long driveway, 5 minutes by car, with 20 acres of thick bushland behind it. The neighbor's house shared the driveway but was surrounded by its own acreage. We were the kind of isolated that feels safe because it is so far from other people, until you remember that the distance cuts both ways. My brother graduated that year and my parents decided, having grown tired of the distance, to rent the house out and move closer to town. A year later, After my mother discovered that even nearby neighbors made noise she found intolerable, we moved back. But this time without my brother, who was settled at university. Everything went back almost exactly as it had been, same rooms, same furniture, same view from my window of the old shed that used to house chickens and alpacas, almost everything. My room felt different. Not the room itself, the dimensions, the walls, the window with its curtains, all exactly as I remembered. But the feeling of it had changed. It no longer felt entirely like mine. Rather than go through the effort of switching rooms and redoing all my posters, I did the simpler thing. I started sleeping with a light on. The renters had left a horse float parked in the paddock beside the shed. My mother was calling them regularly to come and collect it. My father was away for long stretches, a mining project that kept him at a remote island site for 4 weeks at a time, with 2 weeks home in between. It was just the two of us, my mother and me, on this large and isolated property. One night while my father was away, I went to bed early. I was exhausted. I fell asleep quickly. And I had the worst dream of my life. I need to tell you what the dream was, because the dream matters. It began with our dog barking, her particular driveway bark, the one she always started exactly 5 minutes before a car finished coming down the long gravel approach. I went outside in the dream to get her, and it was pitch dark. I could just see her silhouette at the edge of the grass, and she was not barking the way she usually barked. She was rigid, aggressive in a way I had only ever seen her react to kangaroos or the neighbor's dog. Then I heard it, footsteps on the gravel, male voices, more than one, coming from both sides of the house at once. The dog began running back and forth in front of me, trying to place herself between me and the sounds, going from left to right and back again. The voices were getting closer, gradually, steadily. I could hear them laughing softly, saying things I could not make out. The footsteps were crunching closer. I could not see anyone, they stayed just at the edge of the shadows. I tried to scream, I could not. The most I could produce was a labored, strangled breath, no sound at all coming out, just the desperate effort of it. I was paralyzed, and the voices kept coming closer. I woke up lying completely still, flat on my back like a person who had never moved. My eyes opened. I had not been asleep. I had only blinked. That was how it felt. I was shaken badly enough that I barely spoke for days. My mother eventually noticed and asked me what was wrong. When I told her, she stopped what she was doing and looked at me for a long time. The night I had that dream, shortly after I went to bed, just before sunset, 2 men had arrived at the house. They said they were there to collect the horse float on behalf of the renters. The dog had gone absolutely frantic, which was unusual. Ordinarily, she rolled onto her back for strangers and demanded belly rubs within 60 seconds. This time, she would not calm down. My mother did not recognize these men, but they knew about the horse float. She wanted it gone. She put the dog in her kennel to stop the commotion and took the men around to the paddock. One of them wandered around to the back of the house by himself, on the other side of the dog's kennel, and came back and pointed out that there was only one car in the driveway, and that he had noticed before there had been a van too. Whose van was that? He looked directly at my lit bedroom window as he said it. Husband not home tonight. My mother in that instant understood. These men had been here before, watched the house, counted the cars, and left because there had been too many people. They had come back tonight because there was only one car. And now they knew there was a 16-year-old girl asleep in that lit room and no one else home. My mother let out a small, deliberate laugh and said her husband was inside cleaning his guns, but he was probably done now. She would go get him to come help with the float. Our most dangerous weapon was a rusted machete. I have no idea where that came from in her, but I will be grateful for it for the rest of my life. The men said they could manage it without help. My mother said she would just go get him anyway. She walked back to the house, locked every door, stood at the front window with a kitchen knife, and watched them drive away, without the float. When my father came home the following week, he called the renters immediately. They had not sent anyone, not those men, not anyone. They had been trying to organize help to collect the float and take it elsewhere, but no one had been sent yet. Someone had been watching our property. They had been counting our cars. They had been waiting for the right night. And what stopped them, the only thing that stopped them, was a lit bedroom window, a dog who refused to calm down, and a mother who thought on her feet. And me asleep upstairs, having a dream that was not entirely a dream.